The larger man leans over the bus seat and grins menacingly at the small elderly woman while his friend blocks the aisle. "Hey, old lady, why don't you give us your purse and we won't have to get rough with you?" 82-year-old Sergeant Major Grace Ghost Patterson calmly adjusts her position as other passengers look away in fear, completely unaware that the quiet grandmother before them was the most lethal hand-to-hand combat instructor in Marine Corps history and taught close quarters, fighting to 3 generations of elite warriors. This story will absolutely shock you and prove that you should never underestimate anyone. Smash that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever seen someone completely misjudge another person? What happens next will leave these criminals and everyone on this bus speechless. Grace Patterson was riding the evening bus home from her weekly grocery shopping trip, carrying 2 small bags of essentials that would last her the week. At 82, she relied on public transportation to get around the city, and the number 47 bus route had become part of her regular routine. The bus was nearly empty at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, with only a handful of passengers scattered throughout. The seats. Grace sat quietly near the middle, her small frame making her appear vulnerable to anyone looking for an easy target. That's exactly what brothers Jake and Tommy Morrison were doing as they boarded the bus at the downtown stop. The 2 men, both in their 20s with criminal records and a habit of targeting elderly passengers, immediately spotted Grace sitting alone with her purse and grocery bags. Jake, the larger of the 2 brothers at 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, nudged his younger brother Tommy and pointed toward Grace. "Look what we got here," he whispered loud enough for Grace to hear. Easy money sitting all by herself. The bus driver, an older man named Fred, was focused on navigating traffic and didn't notice the potential trouble brewing in his passenger section. The few other riders on the bus immediately sensed danger and looked away, not wanting to get involved in whatever was about to happen. Jake and Tommy moved to the seats directly behind and beside Grace, effectively trapping her in position. They had done this routine dozens of times before with other elderly victims who were too scared or frail to resist their demands. Well, what do we have here?" Jake said loudly as he leaned over the seat to invade Grace's personal space. "Just a little old lady riding the bus all alone with her purse and shopping bags." Grace continued looking straight ahead, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had faced much worse than 2 street criminals during her 30-year Marine Corps career, but she hoped the situation might resolve itself without violence. Tommy positioned himself in the aisle next to Grace's seat, blocking her potential escape route while his brother continued the intimidation from behind. The younger Morrison brother was smaller but meaner, with a nasty scar across his cheek from a previous fight. "My friend here thinks you should share some of that money you've got in your purse," Tommy said with a threatening grin. "We're not asking. Honestly, we're telling you what's going to happen." The other passengers on the bus shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly aware of the developing situation, but too frightened to intervene. An elderly couple near the front whispered nervously to each other, while a teenage girl quickly put in her earbuds and pretended not to see what was happening. Grace finally spoke in a quiet, steady voice that carried no trace of fear or panic. "Young men," she said calmly, "I suggest you find different seats and leave me alone." "You don't want to do this." Jake burst into laughter at her response, finding her calm demeanor amusing rather than concerning. "Did you hear that, Tommy? The little old grandma is giving us advice about what we want to do." Tommy decided to escalate the situation by reaching toward Grace's purse, which was sitting on her lap. "Hand it over, Granny," he demanded. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, we're getting your money." That's when Grace made her decision. She had hoped to avoid confrontation, but these men were committed to their criminal intent and wouldn't be deterred by words. Alone. In one fluid motion that was faster than anyone on the bus could follow, Grace grabbed Tommy's reaching wrist and twisted it in a direction that wrists aren't supposed to bend. The young man's scream of pain echoed through the bus as he found himself completely helpless in her iron grip. Jake jumped up from his seat behind Grace, intending to help his brother, but he had no idea what he was dealing with. Grace released Tommy's wrist and spun around to face the larger attacker with movements that seemed impossible for an 82-year-old woman. Before Jake could react, Grace's small but incredibly strong hand shot out and grabbed his shirt collar, using his own forward momentum to pull him off balance. She then applied a chokehold that cut off his air supply in exactly 3 seconds. Just as she had taught thousands of Marines over the decades, Jake's eyes went wide with shock and terror as he realized this tiny elderly woman had complete control over his much larger body. He tried to break free, but Grace's technique was flawless and her grip was unbreakable. Tommy was still holding his injured wrist and staring in disbelief as his brother struggled helplessly in the old woman's grasp. The criminal who had been so confident about robbing an easy target now found himself facing someone with skills he couldn't comprehend. Grace spoke in the same calm voice, but now there was an edge of authority that commanded immediate attention from everyone on the bus. Gentlemen, she said while maintaining her hold on Jake, I spent 30 years in the United States Marine Corps teaching hand-to-hand combat to some of the most dangerous people on Earth. You picked the wrong target today. The other passengers were staring in amazement as they watched this small elderly woman completely dominate two much younger and larger men who had been terrorizing the bus just moments before. Fred, the bus driver, had heard the commotion and pulled over to see what was happening. When he looked in his rearview mirror and saw Grace restraining both would-be robbers with apparent ease, he immediately called for police assistance. Jake was turning red from lack of oxygen, his hands clawing uselessly at Grace's arm as he tried to break her chokehold. Tommy was backing away slowly, his injured wrist throbbing and his confidence completely shattered. Ma'am, Tommy stammered, his voice shaking with fear and pain. We're sorry. We didn't know. Please let my brother go. Grace looked at both men with the cold stare that had once intimidated hardened Marines during training exercises designed to break weak soldiers. What you didn't know, Grace said with deadly calm, is that I was Sergeant Major Grace Patterson, the Marine Corps' chief hand-to-hand combat instructor for 15 years. I trained Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Force Recon Marines in techniques designed to kill enemy soldiers with bare hands. Jake was now desperately tapping Grace's arm, the universal signal of submission that she had seen thousands of times during training matches. She held the chokehold for exactly 2 more seconds to make her point clear, then released him. The larger Morrison brother collapsed to the bus floor, gasping for air and massaging his throat where Grace's arm had been cutting off his circulation. He looked up at her with newfound respect and genuine terror. Both men now understood they had made a catastrophic mistake in targeting this particular elderly woman. Grace stood over them with perfect military posture, showing no signs of exertion despite having just overpowered 2 attackers half her age. The elderly couple near the front of the bus was staring in amazement, while the teenage girl had removed her earbuds and was watching with wide eyes. Other passengers were pulling out their phones to record the aftermath of what they had just witnessed. Police sirens could be heard, approaching as Fred had provided their exact location and description of the situation. Grace calmly returned to her seat and straightened her jacket as if nothing unusual had happened. Jake was still struggling to breathe normally, while Tommy held his injured wrist and looked like he might be sick from the pain and shock. Both brothers remained on the floor where Grace's demonstration had left them. When the police officers boarded the bus 3 minutes later, they found 2 would-be criminals sitting quietly in custody and a small elderly woman who appeared completely unruffled by the encounter. Officer Martinez, the senior policeman, looked around at the scene with confusion until Fred explained what had happened. The bus driver described how Grace had single-handedly subdued both attackers, using techniques he had never seen before. Ma'am, Officer Martinez said to Grace with obvious respect. "These two have been robbing passengers on city buses for months. We've been trying to catch them in the act for weeks." Grace nodded politely and handed the officer her military identification card, which still listed her final rank and service record. Officer Martinez examined the credentials and his eyebrows went up as he read her background. "Sergeant Major Patterson," the officer said with new understanding. "Thank you for your service, and thank you for taking care of the situation. These men picked the wrong victim today." Jake and Tommy were helped to their feet and placed in handcuffs, still too shocked and injured to cause any further trouble. As they were let off the bus, Jake looked back at Grace with something approaching awe. "Lady," Jake said quietly, "we had no idea who you were. We're sorry we bothered you." Grace looked at both men with the same expression she had once used to evaluate young Marines who had made serious mistakes during training. "Young men," she said firmly, "I hope this experience teaches you to find better ways to spend your time. There are always consequences for choosing to hurt innocent people." As the police car drove away with the Morrison brothers in custody, the other passengers on the bus began approaching Grace to express their amazement and gratitude. The elderly couple thanked her for showing such courage, while the teenage girl asked if she could take a photo with her. Fred, the bus driver, was perhaps most impressed of all. In 30 years of driving city routes, he had never seen anything like Grace's handling of the situation. "AM," Fred said as they resumed their route. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. Those guys have been terrorizing passengers for months, and you handled them like they were children." Grace smiled modestly and adjusted her purse on her lap. "They were just bullies who thought they could intimidate someone they saw as weak and helpless. Bullies usually back down when they face real resistance." The story of Grace's encounter with the Morrison brothers spread quickly through both the local community and veteran networks. The bus company gave her a commendation for her bravery, while the police department asked her to speak at their training academy about situational awareness and self-defense. Jake and Tommy Morrison were sentenced to 3 years in prison for attempted robbery and assault. During their trial, both men admitted they had learned never to judge people by appearances and had gained new respect for elderly citizens and military veterans. Grace Patterson returned to her quiet retirement routine, but her bus rides became much more pleasant as word spread about the grandmother, who had single-handedly stopped 2 criminals with skills that amazed everyone who witnessed them. The incident served as a powerful reminder that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that the quiet elderly person sitting nearby might have experiences and abilities that could surprise anyone who underestimates them based on age or appearance alone.